Hey, my name's Trent Heaton, and I serve as the men's ministry pastor at the Knapp Street campus of Ada Bible Church. And today I'm just so excited to have Dr. Kelly Bonniwell with us. Kelly is not only a professional counselor, he's also on staff here at Ada Bible Church, and I'm just thankful you had a chance to sit down together and talk. Kelly and I have met over the course of the past couple of years, and in our conversations, whether professionally or personally, we feel like we have some topics that we just love to kind of circle back to. And one of those topics we want to talk about today is about intimacy, and specifically intimacy within marriage. And so, Kelly, thanks for being here, and also maybe describe for us a little bit a couple of areas of intimacy within marriage that we can start thinking about, some different categories we can think about. What does it look like to have health, and maybe describe them a little bit for us.
So, kind of as a starting point for me, when I'm talking about marriage, I want to talk about some basics that start with marriage. So, an important element of marriage love is a willed action. It's not a feeling. It's something you do. You have to do. Another really important element of marriage is you have to proactively protect your marriage. And what that means in real time is that you have to guard your heart. You have to really be very, very careful with opposite sex relationships. So those are a couple of the elements. But when it gets to marriage, what I talk about with people that I'm meeting with, Trent, is that there's really three loves that you have to have in a growing way in marriage to have a good marriage. So the first love is agape love. And agape love has two categories to it. It has the category of commitment. I am committed to you no matter what. So, for example, I will be working with a couple who's about to get married, and I'll ask them, is it really for better or for worse? Okay? If your husband loses his job, is it for better or for worse? If your wife comes down with a chronic disease, is it for better or for worse? So agape love is commitment. The other part is sacrifice. An important part that makes marriage work is you have to be sacrificial. You have to change who you are when you get married to somebody. I've been married to Julie for 25 years, and I'm a very different person than I was when I married her 25 years ago, and a large aspect of that is me being a sacrifice and actually doing things, to be honest, sometimes that I don't want to do. So the other two loves, Trent, would be phileo. Phileo is friendship. So agape is I'm committed to you, I love you with a capital L. Phileo is friendship, and friendship is I like you. Okay? So like is, and I've met with couples who have agape, but they don't have phileo. They love their spouse, they're committed to their spouse, but at the end of the day, they don't really like them. And they don't have a friendship. Now that happens over time, but when it comes to phileo, there's two elements to phileo. There is shared interests. I like Julie because we like to do things together. This weekend we're going to go snowshoeing, so we snowshoe together. We travel together. We like to go see a movie and talk about that. So one aspect of phileo is I like my spouse, I share interests in her. Another aspect of that is you like somebody because of their character, okay? And so another aspect of phileo is accountability and character. There's certain elements within me that need to change, and there's certain elements within Julie need to change over the course of, again, 25 years that we've been married. Again, another thing I want to reiterate, none of these love just happen. You have to be proactive and go after them.
I often see when I'm meeting with couples, especially when they're going to get married, in premarital counseling, talking with them, or even as they're newlyweds, it's almost like the phileo thing almost takes care of itself. Like they enjoy this time together.
Totally.
But getting their eyes to maybe see how that over the long haul, as things change in life and careers change and kids come or whatever happens, as much as we can be committed and loyal to each other, that phileo can kind of wax and wane depending on the season of marriage, and it's interesting to see how that changes over time. But like you said, it's a willed effort there. It's a willed experience to work toward that one team oneness.
Again, with these all premarital couples, when they get married, all of these loves are typically at high levels, okay? When we marry a couple at Ada Bible Church, most couples are agapes and it's an 8. Phileo, it's an 8. Eros, it's a 10, So eros is sexual or romantic love. This is, I am passionate about my spouse. And again, in our culture, we base a lot of our love off of our feelings. And again, that's not how the Bible describes any of the loves. None of the loves are about feelings, it's about willed action. There's certain things when I'm doing marriage counseling for me which are non-negotiables. One of those non-negotiables is that when it comes to these loves, agape, phileo, and eros, they have to be on the calendar. Again, they don't just naturally happen. They happen because you're being purposeful about them. So with agape, how that's on the calendar is Julie and I are going to purposefully sit down once or twice a week, maybe some weeks, maybe 3 times a week, where we're going to sit down and have serious conversation about our relationship, what's going on at work, what's going on in our family, et cetera, et cetera. So it's talking. Phileo is that typical date night where, again, we're going to go out, we're going to enjoy one another, we're going to have fun, we're going to maybe go see a movie, blah, blah, blah. And in eros is you're scheduling, and some couples have a challenge with this, but I always tell them, trust me, you want to do this. You literally sometimes have to schedule sex and being sexual and creating that physical intimacy.
But again, that goes back to being intentional. And if it, especially as time goes on and our relationships and things change, typically those things are, that time's filled with other things. And so stuff falls off the table, including our sex life, frankly.
Absolutely.
And unless it's intentionally addressed, is what you're saying, is that it tends to slide off. So within eros, as you described, typically on the front end of these newlyweds, they have this, everything's really in the high range. Maybe describe for us within eros, what do those elements look like of that?
Yeah, I'd love to do that. So again, what I tell people that I'm meeting with, eros, you can create a marriage without eros. But a great analogy to that is it would be like building a wall of bricks and not using mortar. So eros is the mortar of your marriage. So you could build, so if you and I had a bunch of bricks here, I'm going to use mortar, you're not. Your wall could only be built so high. My wall, we could build it as high as we wanted it. The other thing about your wall is if somebody bumped it, it could topple over. And that might be a good analogy of a marriage without eros. So when it comes to eros, there's 4 qualities that you have to have a strong eros in your marriage. So the first one would be quantity. How often are we going to be sexual? It's so important that couples get on the same page about that. Because the other part of this is typically in most marriages, you'll find somebody who, for a better word, they really need sex. And the other person is like, I can live with or without it. And so there's a big difference, for example, maybe in quantity about how often will a couple be sexual. And again, within marriage, you have to have compromise.
Sure.
The next element is, so you got quantity, then you have quality. How is that sexual experience? How good is that sexual experience? How pushed into is that experience? Are both people really there when you're having this sexual experience? The third element is, how creative is it? Is it just let's get this over with, or is it again more of a tender, emotional, creative sexual experience. And then the fourth one is emotional intimacy. Are both persons who are being sexual together, are they there? Are they connecting emotionally?
So in to me, Kelly, and I think that what I see is critically important in all of this is almost the direction of the love. If I am truly loving my spouse with agape, phileo, and eros love in the way God has designed, ultimately it is a pouring out, and the love is directed at, she's the object of my love. Versus what I think, especially within eros, becomes a temptation to turn that around and have the love, it's the love I'm getting, it's the thing I want to get. And in a spirit-led, submitted, the co-submission of Ephesians 5, when it talks about wives submit to your husbands as the authority, and husbands submit to the Lord, and give yourself up for your wife as Christ did the church, that mutual submission is ultimately turning the emphasis of receiving, getting the experience of romance, sex, friendship, and instead turning it on them and saying, I'm going to give you loyalty, I'm going to give you friendship, I'm going to give you romance and sex, like I'm going to give you those parts of myself. And the object becomes less of my inward like thing. And we do have, I'm not saying we don't have the need for that, but in submission we're saying, God, I'm trusting you to fulfill me in that. I'm going to give that to my spouse. And I think there's a lot of healthy ways that can look, and we can work those things out. Kelly, for you, what are some ways in which you think we can kind of ask ourselves, what are some healthy questions we can ask when we're trying to look into our own relationship with our spouse, and maybe try to assess where we're at in these areas, and what are some good indicators that we can look at to say, maybe things need to be tweaked here or there?
Yeah, great question. Number one, the reason why I like the agape, phileo, eros is it's real simple. So I would ask every leader who's here today to reach out to their wife in the next week and just have a conversation about, hey, honey, where are we at on these levels when it comes to agape? Where are we at on a commitment and sacrifice? How do you think I'm doing in that area? This is how I think maybe you're doing. Phileo, in terms of how much we like one another, in terms of shared interests and just being committed to one another in friendship. How are we doing? And then when it comes to eros, it's really important to break them down into the four. How are we doing? How are we doing in terms of being literally sexual in our lives, inside and outside the bedroom? Because eros is not just in the bedroom.
So almost considering too, what is the romantic, what is that romance spilling out over into it in the rest of our lives? What does that look like for me to romantically pursue you outside of just sexually in the bedroom?
Absolutely, especially when it comes to women, because maybe you guys have heard this. Women are like crockpots when it comes to eros. Men are like microwaves. It's a slow simmer for women. So if husbands are not being eros-like outside the bedroom, they're probably not going to get good eros in the bedroom. But again, with those four categories, quantity, hey honey, how do you feel in terms of quality is this sexual experience that we're having? How creative, how emotionally connected are we? And literally what happens, again, almost nearly every couple starts out with high numbers. But then those numbers begin to dwindle as the years go on. You have kids, you have more stress, you have more challenges. You get to really see who you're really married to. And all of us have great qualities, but we also have dark qualities that we need to work on. So a perfect example of this would be, I would say, culture-wide and definitely church-wide. When I'm sitting with a couple, I'll sit with them and I'll take them through this. I'll say, hey, what's your agape? Most couples at Ada, they'll say an 8 or a 9. What's your phileo? Now that number will go down. It's a 6 6 or a 7. But a lot of couples at 8, I'll say, what's your eros? But we're going to go through the through the 4 qualities. Those typically will be lower numbers unless you're proactively going at that. So I would say in most couples who've been married 7 to 17 to 25 years, eros might be their lowest number. And the reason being is eros is so difficult to talk about. And so that's why I really encourage people, find a marriage mentor or find a counselor who can really help you in exploring that area of your marriage.
And I think for me, and I'm guessing maybe for you as well, and Kelly, even being on the counseling end of it, even the conversation, just getting to that point with my spouse to be able to have a conversation about this is uncomfortable, frankly. Even in a good marriage like my wife and I feel like we have a great marriage, and even there's times where it's kind of uncomfortable to talk about these things. So if they haven't been talked about for 25 years, I can only imagine that's even all the more so.
Absolutely.
And just being able to, I think, approach that with grace, being able to approach that again with that object of the love shining away from, that light of love shining away from you onto your spouse, genuinely trying to study and learn your spouse to say, what is it that I can do on my end of the relationship in order to love you more in this area, and helping kind of discover that. And like Kelly addressed, like it doesn't happen right away. It's not immediate. It's a willed action. But I think in the process of doing that, God meets us there in both ways, and it becomes this, like we started the conversation, this greater intimacy in the marriage where we can kind of mentally will ourselves to be loyal to our spouse pretty easier than it is to maybe enjoy our spouse and like our spouse and have fun with our spouse, and all the more so than in the area of eros. And so today for you, maybe take a few minutes and just consider throughout your day, what are some ways that I can, where am I at, first of all? Where do I feel like I'm at in my marriage? Maybe talk about it with your spouse, and then ask the question, what are a few things we can do, maybe even just one thing we can do to improve and take some next steps in this area of our marriage and our intimacy. Thank you, Kelly, for taking some time with us today, and thank you guys for listening.